In the summer of 1858, the city of London was engulfed by a catastrophic environmental crisis, known as the Great Stink. The city was suffocated by an overwhelming odor emanating from the River Thames, where mountains of untreated human waste and industrial runoff had accumulated. An exceptionally hot summer exacerbated the situation, accelerating the fermentation of sewage and the intensifying of the stench to levels unbearable. The noxious miasma was so severe that it disrupted the daily operations of key institutions, including the House of Commons and even the law courts, forcing the British government to confront an issue that could no longer be ignored. The dire circumstances of the Great Stink catalyzed urgent action to overhaul London's archaic and insufficient sewage system. Enter Joseph Bazalgette, a then prominent engineer, who was commissioned to design and implement a comprehensive solution. His pioneering project involved the construction of an extensive network of sewers that effectively redirected the city's waste downstream, far away from the urban center. This monumental engineering feat not only resolved the immediate crisis, but it set new standards for urban sanitation across the world. It significantly improved public health conditions in London, virtually eliminating the frequent cholera outbreaks and other waterborne diseases that had long plagued the city. And so, the events of the Great Stink of 1858 marked a transformative period in the history of London, highlighting the critical importance of sustainable management of waste and leading to public health innovations that shaped modern metropolitan living. Welcome to the channel, everyone. Well, I hope you've already had your dinner, because, well, if you can tell by the introduction, it's going to be a rather smelly video. As always, I do appreciate a bit of spirited conversation in the comments, and a like on the video as well does wonders for the algorithm. You already know that. And so with that in mind, and the very easy click it takes to like and subscribe, let's begin and get nice and relaxed and go back to 1858, or perhaps a little bit earlier, to trace the roots of the Great Stink of London. And so the roots that we begin to trace go back to the 17th century, where sections of the Fleet and Walbrook rivers were enclosed for the purpose of sewage management, which resulted in significant changes to London's sewer system, if a system it could be called. And so we fast forward a little bit to the year 1856, when more than 100 sewers had actually been built in the city of London. However, the problems remained. The city still had more than 200,000 cesspits and approximately 360 sewers, and many of these that they did have were in quite a poor condition. Imagine the smell. Methane and other hazardous gases frequently escaped from these cesspits, which resulted in explosions when they were released. Over the course of the 19th century, the situation only became more dire as the population increased from 1 to 3 million, and the practice of flushing toilets, quite new at the time, was becoming more and more widespread. Well, by the year 1858, where we find ourselves now, the city's outdated sewer system was so overwhelmed by the additional water and waste from the toilets, along with the factories, the slaughterhouses, and other industrial operations. A problem was definitely about to occur. You see, the city's old wooden water pipes had been replaced with iron ones by that year, which seemed to help a little bit, but once again, band-aid solutions. Now, in terms of the Thames River, well, that was further contaminated as a result of the majority of this waste that was dumped directly into it. Now, the condition of the river is actually described by the scientist Michael Faraday in a letter that he wrote to the Times in the year of 1855. Now, based on the results of an experiment that he conducted using white paper to determine the opacity of the Thames, he reported filth accumulated in such dense clouds that it was visible at the surface. No swimming. Thereby comparing the river to what is essentially, for lack of better terms, a giant sewer. Well, the following year, the authorities did make an effort to control the odor by adding chalk lime, chloride of lime, and carbolic acid to the water. But, as we always say once again, band-aid solutions. It didn't really help. It was still awful. Now, a significant portion of Victorian society was a proponent of this miasma theory, which is quite old. It basically proposed that diseases like cholera were brought on by foul-smelling air, particularly which was caused by decomposing organic matter or sewage. Now, you've probably all seen those plague doctors with the mask with the big beak. Now, they actually had a practical application, and it tied in with this miasma theory. You see, that beak was actually not such a stylistic choice, but rather a practical one. You would essentially stuff it full of sweet-smelling flowers and perfumes to combat the miasma, this bad smell. A lot of people believe that if you didn't smell it, it couldn't get you. Of course, this is long before the days of germ theory and all the rest, which people were kind of catching on to at the time, but still quite new. It takes a while for people to catch up. Now, concerns about the rapidly spreading cholera outbreaks that ravaged Europe in the 19th century were also fueled by this theory. Cholera, by the way, was a disease that was particularly feared, as, well, you didn't have much chance of surviving it. And if you did get it, there was a very good chance that everybody else around you would also get it. If the plague wasn't to be feared, cholera was definitely second on the list, perhaps arguable with typhoid, tuberculosis, these sorts of things. Now, there were 6,500 or so people who actually lost their lives as the result of the first significant cholera pandemic that occurred in London earlier in the year 1831. And there was an additional outbreak that occurred in the years between 1848 and 49, which was even worse. In fact, almost 3 times as many people died in that one, just over 14,000. This was followed by an additional outbreak in the years 1853 to 54, which resulted in the deaths of a further 10,000 people. Now, there was a physician in London, Dr. John Snow, who made the observation that the mortality rates were higher in areas that were served by the Lambeth, Southwark, and Vauxhall water companies during the second outbreak. And thus, in 1849, he published a paper with the title On the Mode of Communication of Cholera, in which he proposed the hypothesis of waterborne transmission, as an alternative to the miasma theory. Like I said, People are catching on, but kind of slowly. However, unfortunately for him and all of the people not wanting to die of cholera, the work received very little attention. Now, 6 years later, 1854, following the third cholera outbreak, he published an updated version of the treatise, focusing on the effects that the disease had on Broad Street in the Soho neighborhood. And at that time, a rather interesting event happened that somewhat helped him in pushing his theory out. You see, as a result of heavy snowfall and things icing up, seizing all the rest, there was a local water pump of which the handle had become detached, which prevented access to the contaminated water and resulted in a reduction in the number of fatalities. Now, obviously, they investigated this, and upon investigation it was found that a leaking sewer was located in close proximity to the well from which the water was actually extracted. So the only difference between this well and that well was that one of them had this contaminated water in it and was not actually pure. Definitely raises a few eyebrows. Brush your teeth. Now, during the 19th century, the civic infrastructure that was responsible for managing London's sewers went through a number of different changes. There was one social reformer by the name of Edwin Chadwick, and a royal commission along with it were set up to establish and come up with an idea to the Metropolitan Commission of Sewers in the year 1848, also abbreviated to the MCS if we talk about this later on. Now, it was the first time that a single authority had the power to exercise full responsibility over the sanitation infrastructure of a capital city. Now, the MCS was responsible for replacing 7 of the 8 authorities that had been in charge of London sewers, dating all the way back to the time of Henry VIII. As a result of the Building Act of 1844, which mandated that all new constructions must be connected to a sewer system rather than a cesspool, the Commission was compelled to either connect cesspools to sewers or simply to just get rid of them altogether. Now, a program of frequent flushing of the sewers was implemented by Chadwick and his successor, pathologist John Simon, in response to concerns that miasma from the sewers could facilitate the transmission of disease. This program resulted in an increase in the amount of sewage that was discharged into the Thames. And you see, there's the problem. Always taking it away to some other area. Somebody else's problem. Until, of course, the Thames dries up and it all comes back with a vengeance. Now, the comprehensive plans that Bazalgette had been working on were completed by June of 1856. Remember, he was that civil engineer. Now, these plans included the installation of small, local sewers with a diameter of approximately 3 feet, which is just shy of 1 meter, that would connect to a network of larger sewers and ultimately discharge into the main outflow pipes that measured 11 feet or about 3.5 meters in height. Pretty formidable. Now, the 2 outfall sewers were designed to handle waste management. One of these sewers was designated for the northern side of the river, and the other developed for the southern side of the river. The City of London was divided into 3 distinct zones: high, middle, and low level. Each of these zones was served by a primary sewer, and a network of pumping stations was established to transport waste away from the city and towards the east. The plan that Bazalgette proposed was based on Foster's design. However, it was more expansive and could accommodate a greater increase in population, which went from 3 million to 4.5 million. Thinking ahead, always. Now, the first Commissioner of Works, being Sir Benjamin Hall, was the recipient of Bazalgette's presentation of his proposals. Concerns were voiced by Hall regarding the outfalls, which are the points at which waste is discharged from the sewers that are situated within the capital, and he deemed these outfalls to be unacceptable. Throughout the course of the ongoing conversations, Bazalgette made adjustments and modifications to his plans in order to conform to Hall's requirements. The plans were presented by Hall to 3 consulting engineers in the December of 1856. Now, these engineers were Captain Douglas Strutt Galton of the Royal Engineers, James Simpson, who was an engineer with 2 water companies, and James Blackwood, who was the chief engineer of Kennet and Avon Canal. So the 3 individuals presented their suggestions for alterations to the outfall positions to Hall in the July of 1857. Hall then took it upon himself to forward these suggestions to the MBW in October of that same year. Now, these plans were estimated to cost more than £5.4 million, which, by the way, was significantly higher than the maximum estimate of Bazalgette's plan, which was £2.4 million. The newly proposed discharge points were to consist of open sewers that extended 15 miles beyond the locations that were suggested by the board. During the general election that took place in February of 1858, Lord Palmerston, the best British Prime Minister, his Whig government was actually overthrown, and it was succeeded by Lord Derby's second Conservative administration. Lord John Manners succeeded Lord Hall, and Benjamin Disraeli was appointed as both the leader of the House of Commons and Chancellor of the Exchequer. And so we finally arrive to the day of the stinkiness. By mid-1858, issues concerning the Thames had been accumulating for several years. Now, in his novel Little Dorrit, which was serialized from 1855 to 57, Charles Dickens had actually described the Thames River as, I quote, a deadly sewer in the place of a fine, fresh river. Now, that's a 1-star review from Dickens, that's for sure. Well, in correspondence with a friend, Dickens also remarked, I can attest that the noxious odors, even in that brief inhalation, have been most distending nature for the head and the stomach. While the social scientist and journalist George Godwin had also noted that, I quote, in certain areas the accumulation exceeds 6 feet in depth on the Thames foreshore, and that the entirety is densely saturated with contaminated substances. In June of 1858, the shaded temperatures in London had averaged between 34 and 36 degrees Celsius, which is about 93, 97 Fahrenheit, and had even escalated to 48 degrees in direct sunlight, and that's almost 120 Fahrenheit. Now, the prolonged dry weather resulted in a decrease in the Thames water level, causing the untreated sewage to wash up and accumulate along the river banks. You can only imagine it. Queen Victoria and Prince Albert endeavoured to embark on a leisure cruise on the Thames, but they returned to the shore shortly after due to the smell being so unbearable. So the media got to work quite quickly, promptly dubbing the incident the Great Stink. The principal article in the city press remarked, I quote, "The refinement of language has ceased. It reeks, and anyone who breathes in the odor can never forget it and should consider themselves fortunate if they survive to recall it." An author for the Standard agrees with the viewpoint. One reporter characterized the river as a pestiferous and typhus-breeding abomination. That's a good one. While another noticed that the quantity of poisonous gases emitted is commensurate with the rise in sewage discharged into the stream. The principal article for the Illustrated London News remarked that we can colonize the remotest ends of the earth. We can conquer India. We can pay the interest of the most enormous debt ever contracted. We can spread our name and our fame and our fructifying wealth to every part of the world. But we cannot clean the River Thames. By June, the odor emanating from the river had intensified to such an extent that parliamentary proceedings were disrupted. And you know it's bad when even the government have to get out of there. Well, prompting the curtains of the riverside building to be treated with lime chloride to kind of attempt to make this sort of barrier against the stench. Obviously, this was unsuccessful, prompting discussions regarding the potential relocation of governmental operations to either St. Albans or Oxford. Now, the Examiner reported that Benjamin Disraeli, upon entering a committee room, soon departed with the other committee members, holding a mass of papers in one hand and applying his pocket handkerchief to his nose due to the unpleasant odor. Well, the interruption of its legislative activities has prompted inquiries in the House of Commons. As recorded in Hansard, MP John Brady notified Manners that members were prohibited from utilizing the committee rooms or the library due to the foulness of the odor, and inquired whether the noble lord had implemented any measures to alleviate the effluvium and terminate the nuisance. Manners stated that the Thames fell outside of his jurisdiction. Typical politician, isn't it? Some things never change. Well, 4 days later, a second MP had remarked that through pervasive ingenuity, one of the most illustrious rivers has been transformed into a cesspool, and I wish to inquire whether Her Majesty's government has any plans to take measures to rectify the issue. Manners indicated that Her Majesty's government has no involvement with the condition of the Thames. Once again, typical politician. The satirical publication Punch remarked that the one absorbing topic in both Houses of Parliament was the conspiracy to poison question. Of the guilt of that old offender, Father Thames, there was the most ample evidence. And so, right at the very peak of the disaster, 200 to 250 long tons of lime were utilized near the sewer outlets, discharging it into the Thames, with workers engaged in distributing lime on the Thames foreshore at low tide. Ugh, what a job. And this expenditure amounted to around £1,500 weekly. Of course, they weren't actually cleaning anything up, they were just spraying the lime on top of it. It's not very practical. Well, on the 15th of June, Disraeli presented the Metropolis Local Management Amendment Bill, a proposed modification to the 1855 Act. During the initial debate, he referred to the Thames as a Stygian pool, reeking with ineffable and intolerant horrors. I love the descriptions, I really do. Well, the bill assigned the responsibility of cleaning the Thames to the MBW, and stipulated that, as far as may be possible, sewage outlets should not be located within London's boundaries. It also permitted the board to borrow £3 million to be repaid through a 3-penny levy on all London households over the subsequent 40 years. The terms supported Bazalgette's original 1856 plan and addressed Hall's objections to it. The principal article in the Times noted that Parliament was nearly obligated to enact legislation regarding the significant London nuisance due to the overwhelming order. And so, the bill was deliberated in late July and quickly enacted into law on the 2nd of August. Now, back to Bazalgette. Because he's somewhat the main character, I guess the hero in the story, his proposal for over 1,100 miles of supplementary street sewers designed to collect both effluent and rainwater, which would connect to 82 miles of primary connecting sewers, was tendered between 1859 and 65. 400 draftsmen collaborated on the comprehensive plans and sectional views for the initial phase of the construction process. Numerous engineering challenges needed to be addressed, of course, especially the reality that certain areas of London, including Pimlico and Lambeth, were actually situated below the high water mark, which could cause some issues. Now, Bazalgette's strategy for the low-lying regions involved elevating sewage from low-lying sewers at critical junctures into the mid- and high-level sewers. Now, that would subsequently discharge by gravity anything in there towards the eastern outfalls at a gradient of 2 feet per mile. Now, Bazalgette advocated for the utilization of Portland cement, a material that possessed greater strength than conventional cement, kind of a new thing at the time, but unfortunately it is susceptible to degradation when subjected to excessive heat, which was exactly what they were getting. Now, to address that issue, he implemented a quality control system to evaluate batches of cement, characterized by some as both elaborate but also draconian. The results were communicated to the manufacturers, who modified their production process to enhance the product further, perfecting it, making little tweaks as they went along. Cement. It's a hard job. Well, a cement manufacturer remarked that the MBW was the inaugural public entity to implement such testing procedures. The advancement of Bazalgette's projects was positively reported in the media too. Everyone was getting pretty excited about it. In fact, people were depicting him and the workers on it in kind of a heroic light. You can imagine people giving them a kind of a round of applause on their way to get rid of the horrible smell. In fact, I would even go so far to say that they probably saved more lives. Well, they definitely saved more lives than any of the doctors ever did in London. Think about that. Thank your local plumber. Well, of course, plumbing is expensive. So in July of 1863, an additional $1.2 million was loaned to the engineers to address the exorbitant construction costs. But pretty much at this point, I think you couldn't really put a price on it. People were willing to pay whatever it takes to sort out that issue. And so the southern system, traversing the sparsely populated suburbs of London, constituted the smaller and more manageable segment of the infrastructure to construct. 3 primary sewers extended from Putney, Wandsworth, and Norwood, converging in Deptford. A pumping station elevated the effluent 21 feet into the primary outflow sewer, which directed it to the Crossness pumping station on the Erith marshes, where it was released into the Thames at high tide. The recently constructed station at Crossness was designed by Bazalgette, in cooperation with consultant engineer Charles Driver, an advocate for the utilization of cast iron as a construction material. And eventually, they'd finished it all up. The pumping station was inaugurated in the month of April 1865 by the Prince of Wales. That was the future King Edward VII, by the way, who ceremoniously commenced the engines himself. The ceremony attended by various members of royalty too, MPs, the Lord Mayor of London, and the Archbishops of Canterbury and York, and they all managed to have a nice dinner afterwards, to the tune of 500 guests within the venue, which now, no doubt, smelled quite a bit more pleasant than it did before. Now the ceremony signified the conclusion of the southern outfall sewers construction and the commencement of their operation. Chalk this one to a win for the engineers. So, following the successful execution of the southern outflow, a board member of the MBW, MP Miller, proposed a bonus for Bazalgette, which is very nice of him, but that just goes to show you how impressed and happy everybody was with him. Like I said, a hero in the story. Now the board consented to compensate the engineer £6,000, which was 3 times his annual salary. But that wasn't enough. They also wanted an extra £4,000 to be distributed among his 3 assistants. Despite the idea being abandoned after criticism, it's noted that these substantial sums were considered during a period when frugality was the prevailing trait of public spending. It's a very strong indication of this significant public interest and endorsement that characterized the process of the work. So, the northern bank of the Thames was more populous compared to the south, accommodating 2/3 of London's inhabitants. This was going to be a much bigger job, necessitating the works to navigate through congested streets and surmount urban obstacles. We're talking bridges, canals, and of course the railway lines, which were also kind of a new thing, but there were plenty of them. So construction of the system commenced on the 31st of January 1859. However, the builders faced various challenges. One of them was actually a labour strike, which lasted from 1859 to 60. And also, this time, not the severe summer weather, but severe winter frosts and above average rainfall. Not pleasant conditions to work in, by anyone's reckoning. And so in June of 1862, the torrential rain caused an accident at the construction site of the Fleet Sewer. The extensive excavations were conducted alongside the cutting excavation at Clerkenwell for the Metropolitan Railway, and the 8.5-foot wall separating the 2 trenches collapsed, releasing waters of the Fleet onto Victoria Street. They also managed to damage the gas and water mains. Now, the elevated sewer, the northernmost of the infrastructure, extended from Hampstead Heath to Stoke Newington and traversed Victoria Park, where it connected with the eastern terminus of the mid-level sewer. The mid-level sewer originated in the west at Bayswater and traversed Oxford Street, passing through Clerkenwell and Bethnal Garden prior to the junction. The integrated main sewer directed flow to the Abbey Mills pumping station in Stratford, where it connected with the eastern segment of the low-level sewer. Well, as for the pumps at Abbey Mills, they elevated the effluent from low-level sewer by 36 feet into the main sewer. The primary sewer extended 5 miles along the current Greenway to the outfall at Beckton. Now, similar to the Crossness pumping station, Abbey Mills was a collaborative design by Bazalgette and Driver. Atop the centre to the engine house was an elaborate dome that some assert to be a superficial resemblance to a Byzantine church, which arguable, I suppose. Now, the architectural historian Nicholas Pevsner, in his Buildings of England book, remarked that the structure exhibited exciting architecture applied to the most nefarious purposes. There's something to be said for it, I suppose. He further characterizes it as an unorthodox amalgamation, vaguely Italian Gothic in style, yet featuring tiers of Byzantine windows and a central octagonal lantern that imparts a refined Russian essence. Well, in February of 1864, we're not travelling back in time, Bazalgette commenced the construction of the 3 embankments along the banks of the Thames to facilitate drainage for the low-level sewers. He constructed the Victoria embankment on the northern side, extending from Westminster to Blackfriars Bridge, and the Chelsea embankment, which stretches from Millbank to Cadogan Pier in Chelsea. The southern side features the Albert embankment, extending from the Lambeth terminus of Westminster Bridge to Vauxhall. He constructed sewers adjacent to the Thames, erecting walls on the foreshore, installing sewer pipes within, and then backfilling around them. The project appropriated over 52 acres of land from the Thames. The Victoria embankment additionally alleviated congestion on the existing thoroughfares between Westminster and the City of London. The estimated cost of constructing the embankments was £1.7 million, with about £450,000 allocated for acquiring the requisite riverfront properties, primarily designated for light industrial purposes. Now, the embankment project was regarded as nationally significant, and due to the Queen's illness, the Prince of Wales inaugurated the Victoria embankment in July of 1870. The Albert embankment was also completed in November of 1869, and the Chelsea embankment inaugurated by July of 1874. Bazalgette regarded the embankment project as one of the most challenging and complex undertakings that the NBW had to execute, and shortly after the inauguration of the Chelsea embankment, they actually knighted him. That's right, the sword down on both ears, Sir Bazalgette. Now, in 1875, the Western Drainage Project was finalized, and the system had become fully functional. The construction necessitated 318 million bricks and almost 900,000 cubic yards of concrete and mortar, culminating in a total expenditure at the end of the day of approximately £6.5 million. Well, Moving on to 1866, a subsequent cholera outbreak in London resulted in almost 6,000 fatalities, though it was restricted to a region of the East End between Aldgate and Bow. Now here's the interesting thing. At that time, the region was not integrated into Basilgate's system, resulting in 93% of the fatalities occurring within that area. Now, as we all say, the proof is in the pudding, isn't it? Well, the responsibility rested with the East London Water Company, which released its sewage half a mile downstream from its reservoir. The incoming tide was transporting the sewage upriver into the reservoir, thereby contaminating the local drinking water. Not good. The emergence and identification of its causes resulted in the acknowledgement that cholera was actually waterborne, rather than spread by miasma. The Lancet reported that Dr. William Farr's investigation would substantiate his conclusions regarding the water supply's role in the epidemic's causation, and it was actually the final occurrence of the disease in the capital. That's right. After they fixed the sewers, they fixed the sickness. Now, of course, at least one of them, the waterborne diseases. There'll be plenty more diseases to come, don't worry. Now we go forward a little bit now to 1878. The Thames pleasure steamer SS Princess Alice collided with the collier Breuil Castle and sank, resulting in 650 deaths. The incident occurred near the outfalls, prompting inquiries in the British media regarding the potential link between the sewage and several fatalities. Not a good place for a swim, that's for sure. Well, in the 1880s, escalating concerns regarding potential health risks associated with outfalls prompted the Metropolitan Board of Works to actually purify the sewage at Crossness and Beckton, instead of just straight out discharging untreated waste into the river. Once again, another advancement. Consequently, 6 so-called sludge boats, which is a very disgusting name for them, were commissioned to transport the goods for disposal in the North Sea. The inaugural vessel, commissioned in 1887, was designed and called the SS Bazalgette. The operation persisted until December of 1998. That's right, 1998, when the disposal of waste actually transitioned to incineration. I'm sure those up on the shores of the North Sea were quite happy with that development. Of course, the sewers again were enlarged in the late 19th century, and subsequently in the early 20th century. As of 2015, the drainage network is administered by Thames Water and serves up to 8 million individuals daily. The company stated in 2014 that the system is struggling to meet the demands of 21st century London. Which leaves us with the question, are we only around the corner from the next great stink? Heaven forbid that. Well, and with that, we reach the end of the video. I hope you enjoyed that one. A little bit of different kind of history, a bit of engineering, a bit of public safety, a bit of epidemiology. We can get a bit of everything, don't we? So I'm going to thank my top tier patrons and supporters: Dark, Kerry, Kimberly, Ben, Ember, Britt, Charles, Erin, James, Jeffrey, Melissa, Scott, Stark Factory, Wendy, Jaden, Sherry, Jessica, Christine, Sally, Katiana, Christine, Fizarbo, Legitmus, Maverick, and Susan. Thank you very much. And I hope you all enjoyed. We're going to have a nice little rest now, shall we? Good night, everyone. Lots of love to you all, and I will see you in the next fine-smelling video. Good night.